So it's been about 5 years and change that I've since I've arrived in Canada, and I remember the first New Year's that I was spending here. I think early January 2019. I was in a coffee shop and I felt really miserable at the time. I was working with Tom Beal, our mutual friend. And Tom actually taught me many of the concepts that he learned working with you because you guys worked together for like 10
Yes.
years or something, right? So for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So, he taught me so many different things. And we were having conversation with him, and he was pointing out that I was operating from fight or flight all the time.
Right.
And, I was telling him that I recognize that, but I don't want my kids to be that way. Like when my daughter and my son do stuff, I don't want them to be doing that out of fear or out of the desire for survival, which is how I do things. I tend to be like that. It's everything's like crisis, everything's a fire. It's like if we don't fix this now, like paranoia, like it's a lot of that in my life, in my inner world. But for my kids, I really wish they create. I really wish they did things because they wanted to do them, because they excite them. And I was wondering how much of my crisis mentality sort of was passed down with my DNA to my kids. And I don't know how that works, to be honest. But I'm hoping that growing up in a Western household of a, I don't know if I can call myself rich, by today's standards, because $1 million doesn't really buy much, but at least upper middle class sort of standard.
Yeah. We're all doing okay.
Yeah, I wonder
Yeah.
how much that will affect their vision and their a bit like the way they see the world and the way they see themselves. Because on one hand, I'm afraid for them to be uh, unmotivated, to basically be sort of settled and be like, well, I have food, I have this, I have that, and everything's available to me. It's very convenient, so I'm not going to strive for much. But at the same time, I don't want to scare them into it. I don't want to like make them paranoid and obsessed with survival, like I was growing up, and my wife as well, who had to literally to shoplift,
Right.
growing up because they didn't have food on the table. Growing up, three kids with a single mom and below poverty line. So I don't know, like, do you have any perspective on that? On how do you instill these values, perhaps, or anything you've learned along the way?
I've learned a couple things. I mean, I would say that one of my favorite books of all time, um, because I think it's something that I naturally gravitate to, but I think it's a lesson that a lot of people could benefit from. The book is called "The Courage to Be Disliked," and it was a bestseller in Japan. I think it's also been a bestseller here in the States since. And it's about the psychology of Alfred Adler, and I've always been a fan of Alfred Adler's psychology. He was a peer of Freud and Jung, but not as well known by most people. Had some very different views. And one of the things that Adler talks about is that we all have like what he calls our life tasks, and that's to make relationships work, in friendship, and in love. And that what interferes with relationships working is when we interfere on the life tasks of others, like uninvited. And so, like, it's your kid's life task to do their homework, right? It's not your life task. And so I've always been good about like kind of separating those things, primarily because I didn't have a lot of confidence in my own ability to enforce consistent rules, right? Like, and I've always been told that that's a horror show if you're not consistent. So instead of being inconsistent, I was consistent in the sense that there are consequences in life to doing and not doing things. My goal is to help you avoid those consequences, like negative consequences, but it's not, but the consequences are on you. They're not on me. So like at a very young age, I had all daughters. They could make up their own decision whether they could go out and play or not, like, because like they had to have their homework done the next day regardless. And it wasn't my job to make sure that they did their homework. It was their job to make sure that they did their homework. And if they didn't
Okay.
get their homework done, there'd be consequences at school. And that would be the way it is.
Yo, it's Igor. I want you to have my Amazon best-selling book for free for taking the time to listen to my podcast and to watch my YouTube videos. Now, I'm not only going to give you this book for free, but I'm going to throw in about $3,200 in free bonuses. Now, if you want to get this book, please click the link in the description, or you can also go to igorsbook.com. And now, back to the podcast.
And I'd say that that worked really well for me, and that like the girls got it pretty early on. And I would say that the other thing I did, which I am proud of, I think that this made a difference, was that I didn't get, because I almost did, like I almost got corrupted into not having appreciation for other shit other than my own stuff. Like, you know, like the stuff that I'm interested in, marketing, business growth, stuff like that. But, you know, like when my oldest daughter was interested in baking, right? Like I could go two ways with that, right? Like I wish she was interested in something else, right? Like, or like I can approach it the way I wish things were approached with me when I was younger and interested in whatever I was interested in. And so, like, when my daughter was interested in baking, great. Let's have you be the best baker possible, right? And like, what do we need to do that? Like, let's hire like a baker to come in and teach you how to bake, and let's get all the like stuff for baking and all the supplies and all that shit, right? And like, you can, so it's kind of like with my kids, it was always like you can be into anything you want to be into, and you can want to like do whatever it is you want to do. But whatever it is you want to do, I want you to want to be great at what that is. And as long as you're willing to want to be great, I will support you in any way I can. So, you know, when my kids were interested in karate, then they were going to karate all the time. When they were not interested in anymore, that's fine too. But like, you know, always trying to instill like a desire to be good or great or, you know, fantastic. And I think that's worked out pretty well. I think that, I used to be completely fear-based, completely motivated by like what the negative things that could happen, and then use that power, like that fear, to work insane hours, like in crunch time, to like get shit done, right? Like, and go days sometimes without sleep and stuff like that. And it worked for me, but you can't, or I couldn't continue that. Like, I'm not at, you know, in my 50s now, I cannot pull back to back all nighters and be functional like I was in my 20s, right? Like, it's just not possible. And I was much more afraid of for my own self. Like, can I work like a normal person? Is it even possible for me to work like a normal person? Because like I crammed in college, I worked this way my whole life, like, you know, and it did take a couple of years to kind of reset, you know, that difference. And I still find it much easier to run away from something negative than to run towards something positive. Um, but I find that on the positive side, breaking it up to be closer in time also works well for me.
How do you mean? Like setting a goal that takes, or taking a big goal and breaking it down into lots of mini goals?
Yeah, like in other words, like the right now, like I'm working with my morning routine and I'm adjusting it and stuff like that. And so there's no other goal than just right now, like being able to do that, like this new routine, 7 days, like for 7 days in a row. And if I
Right.
do it
Okay.
7 days in a row, it's a big deal, right? Like, you know, the goal is to do it every day consistently forever, but that's not where I'm at right now. So, you know, it's like small goals seem to be big, scary things far away move me, and very like immediate things, positive, can move me. But big, long term things far away don't seem to have much power for me, you know? And
Yeah.
so I just have figured out a way to kind of like work around that. And I think that that's part of growing up is understanding like how you work and how to get the best out of yourself based on that, like your own rules for how you need to operate. That ideally, like you've lived for 30, 40 some odd years, you should have some inclination of how you work best, like what works best for you. For me, like that's a big part of my journal too, just reminding myself of like all the things that I've tried over all the years and like the things that stand out as working best, like working towards a timer, like using a mind map early in a project so that I have a place to like put all my ideas. These are things that I've just learned over time, like of what works best for me, and not losing that, and just like knowing what works best for me and being okay with it. And I think that that's part of like growing up and just understanding yourself better is that process.
I agree. I agree when you put it that way, that it's a part of growing up. It was when you are responsible for figuring out what's working for you, what's not working for you, and to they take this full ownership of, if things don't look like, if they don't look well in life, like if you don't like the way things are in life, then it's up to you to change the habits, the circumstance, the people, if necessary. Because I think what you mentioned about people's energy being contagious for you is a huge thing. Because I remember in the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, which is another really cool book that I really like to reread sometimes. He talks about people's attitude being contagious, and he warns about hanging out with people who complain too much, or people who get sick too much, because that shit kind of wears off on you, and you kind of start modeling that, or you start behaving in a similar way, which makes sense. I mean, they talk about like, tell me what your 5 closest friends make, then I'll tell you what you make. Or they talk about how if you want to be making more or doing better, then you should get into a room full of people who make more and do better, because you will automatically strive to match what's happening in that room.